Hello Helix users and other guitar players out there, I'm Paul. This is my very first and possibly last educational video on a subject that for some reason always seems to trigger me. So why did I make this video? Well, on the very awesome Facebook group for Line 6 Helix users, a lot of people seem to be interested in vocoders and talkboxes and how they are supposed to work in the Helix or as an external unit with the Helix. But there also seems to be a lot of confusion about talkboxes and vocoders, especially the difference between the two and even the very nature of how they work. For example, somebody might post a message saying, "I wish there was a talkbox in the Helix." And then somebody might reply to that, "Yes, they really should add a vocoder." Now, that first person doesn't realize that a talkbox is in fact impossible to recreate or remodel in a believable or convincing way, or practical way. And that second person doesn't know the difference between a vocoder and a talkbox. So in this video I'm going to do try to do three things. First of all, explain the difference between the two. Explain how they work. Second of all, I'll try to explain why no one can ever model a talkbox for 100%. And finally, I'll show you how you can integrate an external talkbox and a vocoder in your Helix setup. An external unit, of course. Use them in a single chain in a very flexible way and allows for easy switching, easy blending of tones, but something that should really work in pretty much all the cases. First, of course, I'm going to show you a vocoder and a talkbox. This is my example of a vocoder. Of course, I'm on a limited budget, so I only have one. This is the one I have. It's a fairly recent pedal by Boss. Very pleased with it. I'm not going to do a full review. There are some very interesting reviews on YouTube, and I'm going to put at least one link in the description below the video. The other thing I have here is my talkbox. This is a Rocktron Banshee. And I think these two, the vocoder and the talkbox, are two fairly common models of talkboxes and vocoders on the market. Don't get scared, but I'm going to use a small PowerPoint to explain some differences and also explain some setups later on in this video. Something essential to notice, the blue arrows show actual sound. That's what you pick up with your ears. That's these things. And the red arrows that are electric signals, so that's what travels in cables. And it's a very trivial concept, I know, but this difference will be important in the rest of the video. Now, a vocoder takes an electric instrument signal, so it could be your guitar, could be any other instrument, and takes another signal from a microphone, which will be your voice or anybody's voice, and it blends those two together in a synthesizer sort of way. It's, well, magic happens. I don't know how it really works, but it blends the two tones together. The result is usually a robotic voice effect, and it comes as an electric signal out of the vocoder. This one has an output jack right here. Maybe in some models it's something else. In this case you go in with a jack for the instrument, an XLR connection for your microphone, and it comes out with a jack, but it's all cables and all electronic signals. That's the most important part. Some very good examples of vocoders can be found with bands like Kraftwerk, Daft Punk, and I think I'm going to put some examples in the description below the video, and also a link to the song "Oh Superman" by Laurie Anderson. It's from the early 80s, I think, which is a song which is, I think, 95% vocoder. To be honest, I don't really like it. It's very boring to listen to, but as a concept it's very interesting. Now, the essential thing on this pedal, so like I showed you, are the two inputs, one for the instrument, one for your microphone, and the output jack. And the other controls are a mode knob, which has the vintage setting on it. I don't know if you can see this. One of these 4 settings is the vintage setting, and that's a classic vocoder sound. It has a color and a tone knob which just changes the sound or the character of the effect, a volume knob and a blend knob. Now this blend knob, this allows you to control how much of your effect you want to mix with the original sound. It's like the mix setting on most blocks in the Helix effects. Let's go back to the schematics. So that's what we just discussed. We have our voice, our audible voice going into the microphone, mixed together with the guitar, and magic happens in the vocoder and comes out of an electrical system, and then in the PA system or whatever it is, well, you have an electronic signal to work with. You can add effects, of course, you can just send it straight to an amp or to the PA system, whatever. Okay, so back to the schematics. So what we just saw was we have our voice going into the microphone, mixed together with the guitar, blended together in a magical sort of way in the vocoder, and then going out as an electronic signal which you can process any way you want and eventually send it to the PA system. Now to the talkbox. I have one here. It's a Rocktron Banshee. Now, how does this work? There's an input for your guitar, some controls on the top that should seem very familiar. I'll let you show. Gain, tone and output. This should remind you, or most of you, of an amplifier, and that's actually exactly what this is. This is a very tiny amplifier. This model has some extra features. It has some buttons to control this effects loop, whether or not you activate that. You can hook up an external speaker to it, and you have a bypass to your signal chain. So if you switch it off, the talkbox, you still have some guitar going through. And with this button you can actually choose whether or not your guitar goes through all the time or only when you're not using the talkbox. That's a very interesting feature. If your talkbox model does not have that, and it always sends the signal straight through, then you might have a problem, but we will come to that later and provide you with a solution for that. Everything can be fixed. Some good talkbox examples, of course. Peter Frampton, Pink Floyd has some goods. Bon Jovi. I'll put some links in the description below. Now, how does this look in the schematics? So you have your guitar, which is an electronic signal, comes into the talkbox, and then gets changes into audible sound as soon as it leaves this this amplifier, which has a very tiny speaker here. You can see it here. The sound comes out of the speaker, travels through the tube, so there's actual sound in the tube. Some people seem to think that it has to do with sucking or blowing into it, but those people obviously never have played with a talkbox. No, it's just a regular sound coming out of the tube, going into your mouth. Your mouth, you change it, you position it in a way, you make really absurd faces with it. The sound travels into your mouth and reflects out of it again into your microphone right in front of you. And only then it's changed again into an electronic signal and you can process it again. And that actually brings me to my second point, why you can never ever model a talkbox for 100% or in a believable, convincing or practical way. If you have a talkbox effect that does not require you to sing in a microphone or use a microphone in any way, then you would have to rely on some frequency changes that are pre-programmed, but that have nothing to do with the actual movement of your mouth that you would make if you are using a real talkbox. So these 3 steps, and I really included these arrows before and after the mouth, the position of the tube in your mouth, you can change that. You can squeeze the tube, you can hold it in right between the front of your teeth, like this, or you can put it all the way into your, almost into your throat, which is not very advisable, but you can do it. You can have really cool effects with it, a really throaty sound, if it's actually almost in your throat, and then going back and forth on the tube really gives a cool sound. But how would anybody model that in a digital way, in a digital application, or in a Stompbox or any way? It's impossible, because nobody can predict the movement you are about to make. Then the mouth itself, your mouth is different than my mouth. Everybody's mouth is different. Also the movement of our mouth, the frequency in which we change our position of our mouth. You can play, I don't know, 4 chords after another, all the same length, all the same attitude in which you played, but the position of your mouth will change on every chord, and it will make a totally different sound. How would a Stompbox or a digital model simulate that? It can never predict what you want to do. Your mouth is totally 100% under your control for most people, obviously. So that's impossible to recreate. And then the last arrow, the mouth, the sound coming out of your mouth into your microphone, the distance between your mouth and your microphone, that would be something that they assume to be, I don't know, a few inches maybe. But you can actually change that. You can have volume changes by moving away and towards your microphone. So also impossible to model. It can never predict what you are going to do positioning wise. So that's why you can never ever model a talk box. Now, maybe if you noticed, but this vocoder, this model, has a specific talkbox setting. Let me get this in close up. So this mode knob doesn't focus, but this top setting is talkbox. And what it actually does is work like a vocoder, but you have to sing like a talkbox. So you have to sing the effect that you want to achieve. So if you want an ooh-ah like that Bon Jovi riff, you have to actually sing it, not shape it with your mouth in front of a microphone, but you have to sing the effect, and then it gets blended with your guitar sound, and then you have a talkbox effect. If you're happy with that, by all means go with that, but I don't think it's really practical. Some long drawn out chords, you have to really hold your breath and keep singing the tone, or you will lose it. Vocoder is really only making sound when you are making sound yourself. So if you have a really long drawn out chord that gradually changes, you have to keep that volume all the way, so you have to be a pretty good singer. And make the effect believable yourself. The pedal is not going to do that for you. If you only have a budget for for only one of these, and you need to do the two things, of course, this might be a handy go-between, but I would never ever call this a talkbox. It's a vocoder with a talkbox-like setting if you as a person act like a talkbox, and I think that's really not very not very real. So that's point 2, what I was trying to make. You can never ever model a talkbox. Now a vocoder, obviously you can model that. I mean, this in fact is a model. Any other vocoder would be a model. It's a tool, fully electronic. Everything electronic can be modeled, so that's probably very easy. Right, now to integrate the talkbox into our Helix system or any audio chain. Let's look at the schematics first. I think the most obvious way to do this would be to go with your guitar into the talkbox, and then from the output of the talkbox to the Helix, to the guitar in of the Helix. I probably think that's the most obvious solution for most people when they first handle these. Now let's see what would happen. This is what it looks like in real life. The blue cable is my guitar cord coming into the talk box, then a white patch cable from the output of the talk box into the Helix. Now some advantages, well, it's very easy to set up, that's obvious. Now some disadvantages, depending on the model of the talk box, you might have some problems, because I told you earlier that my model has a special button which disables the output to the rest of the chain when I'm using the talk box. Now if your talk box doesn't have this and it only has an output which is actually always on, then you're playing your talk box but you're still hearing your original guitar sound. Sometimes you might want that, sometimes you might not want that, and of course if you can't control it, that's a problem. Now that is easily fixed if you set up a simple chain like this, and of course you're coming in through the talk box in the guitar input. If you then put a gain block there with the setting all the way to the left, so minus 120 dB, it acts as a mute button. You of course assign this to a foot switch, and all you have to do is press that foot switch to deactivate the sound going to your usual chain and giving you your original guitar sound. Now of course big drawback of that is that you need to activate the talk box and disable your guitar sound in one go. So that's two buttons to push, one on the talk box, this one, and the other one on the Helix. So that's tap dancing, and when you have a Helix with all these functionalities like multiple effects on one foot switch or snapshots and all that, it's pretty silly to need two buttons to complete one action. So maybe that's already a first problem that we are encountering now. A second problem is that unless you are using two microphones, one for your talk box and one for your regular singing, but that is, I think, pretty rare. So most of the times you're using only one microphone. It could be that, depending on the settings of your talk box, that if you're singing much quieter or much louder than when you are using the talk box. I mean, this the volume of the talk box is only defined by what comes in, of course, but that's usually your guitar on full volume or something, and the output knob, the gain knob also a bit, but especially the output. Now, if you want to shape your talk box sound, you're going to dial this in pretty loudly, especially on a loud stage. Also, because on a loud stage you need a good volume to go into your microphone, because if you have a soft volume going into your microphone, it might pick up more surround sound than you need. So you want a decent signal, and you can actually feel it in your mouth when it's really hot, when it's really loud. But of course it can be much louder than your regular singing, and it all goes to one microphone, so that's only one channel on the mixing desk. And if there's a level imbalance between your singing and the talk box, the people at the mixing desk will have a hard time adjusting the volume, the equalizing, maybe some other effects that you want at the same time, when you're making the change from regular singing to talk boxing and back. So that's something very unpleasant for the mixing people. You might not notice on stage, but to mix something like that, that's almost hell. So you might want to avoid that, and you might want to have control over your voice, over your vocal sounds, the sound that's going through your microphone. But we'll come to that later. We'll fix the first problem first, the tap dancing. And we can do that with a small change to the setup. You see in the bottom picture, you see my blue cord, the guitar cable, going straight into the Helix, to the guitar in. And I'm using send 1 in this case, so the send block and then the send output to go from the Helix to the input on the talk box. It looks like this. Very small change, but very, very interesting. Because we can do several things now. When you look at my signal chain, I have here the send block. When you activate this, when it's put like this, so you have send at 0 dB and dry through, so the sound that passes through when you have the send block activated, you mute that, you put that on minus 120. When you activate this block like this, your guitar sound will be sent through send 1 to your talk box. The talk box will produce a sound and you can play with that and go on. Now the interesting thing is, if you use this send block, you have space before the send block. You can use this to put effects on your guitar sound going to your talk box. Like something I like very much is a very cool effect, a tremolo, a simple tremolo effect. At a rather whatever speed, experiment with this. It's really fun to do, and you have a tremolo sound going into your mouth and then into your microphone. It's totally different from this when than if you make a continuous sound and then cut it into pieces with a tremolo. You will notice that. Also, at this moment we don't even have control over what's going into our microphone. So the only thing to adjust the sound that we're making with the talk box is by putting effects in front of the talk box. And we can do that here. We can move our send block around, we can add more effects, experiment with that. A talk box is a really fun toy to play with. And that's basically it. You can also, of course, assign these two blocks to the same foot switch. So just like before, you can press that foot switch, and at this moment you will go from your regular guitar sound to your talk box sound in just one click, because you can leave your talk box on at all times, because when you're not using it, this send block will be deactivated and there will be no signal going to your talk box, and then it will make no sound. It will make, depending on the setting and the gain on your talk box, it will make a slight hiss, but you will not notice that when you're playing live. And I think that's already a very big step forward. You have now one switch that activates both the talk box and deactivates your normal guitar sound. Also, you can blend in a normal guitar sound if you just pull this right through a bit up. If you leave it at 0, you have equal talk box and equal regular guitar sound. You can adjust this with snapshots maybe. And of course you can add effects before your talk box. Only one thing more to solve, and that is the vocal problem. As soon as we use a talk box and we send a talk box sound into a microphone, we don't have control over that. Now we're going to change that, and that is actually rather simple. We're going to use a microphone path, and I know a lot of 100% pure guitarists on the Helix will not like that, but in fact you cannot do much wrong with this. Maybe if you're one of the types who uses 32 blocks to generate one specific guitar sound, then I seriously think you need to reconsider your options and merge some blocks together, which is perfectly possible. Condense your signal chain, but with a microphone path you will see that you have a lot more control over, in this case, the talk box, and later on also the vocoder. Now, this microphone, if we just connect that microphone to our Helix, of course you need a floor or the rack unit. Sorry, LT users. You get the signal, and depending on what setting you're on, you have either the talk box or your regular vocals. And you might want different effects on that. Now, a word of advice, normally you don't put effects or not certain effects on your vocals, like reverb, that's probably added at the mixing desk. Compression and equalizing, definitely added at the mixing desk. You don't need to do that. You don't have your ears on stage are not the same ears and the same sound as in the middle of the space you're playing. So leave that to the mixing desk. But for instance, delays, a certain kind of distortion maybe on your vocals when you're regularly singing. That might be the regular vocal effects. But when you're talkboxing, it's probably a solo or something. You might need a totally different delay and some reverb. So you can add blocks to this chain and activate them depending on what setting you're on. And the setting you're on is controlled by the same foot switch we used earlier. So you can assign all these blocks just to one foot switch. Also, the leveling problem you can solve by using a simple gain block. If you notice your talkbox sound is way louder than your usual singing, well, just add a gain block with a few decibels off, like, I don't know, -5, -10, depending on what you are doing, and activate that block when you're using the talkbox, and everything will come out straight and level, and just like the people at the mixing desk will want. Now, you don't have to stop there, because in this system we are using one microphone and sending the output of that microphone probably by XLR on the right or whatever, just using one output to send that one output to one channel on the mixing desk. Now you can change that. Let me show you by dragging this block down and then deleting this merge point. And that's a very little known trick, but that's extremely useful. Now you have two outputs. You can actually take this block, move it all the way to the front, and now you can treat one path as your regular vocal track and the other path as your talkbox track. And you can send it to a different output, so the people at the mixing desk can treat it as a different channel. So if they want to apply some sort of different compression on it than your regular vocals, they can do so. They don't need to adjust equalizing or compression or volume or whatever on the spot. They can just preset it on a different track on the mixing desk and leave it for the rest of the concert. And that's, I think, so much more convenient than just having everything through one microphone and let the mixing desk handle it. They cannot handle it. If you change from regular singing to a completely different sound on the same track and it's not leveled, it's not EQ balanced, it's not, it needs different effects and all that, you're asking really a lot from your mixing desk engineer, and that's not something you should do. Trust me on that. So with this you have complete control. You can control equalizing for the both paths, but again, I'd say don't equalize your regular voice. But other effects, you're free to put anything on it just like you want it, and then maybe control the settings, the split setting with your block. You can split A, B maybe, and then by various snapshots you can route this to one path or the other, or maybe even blend it. In this way you can blend your normal vocals with your talkbox. Now, I would not recommend it because you're not really making a sound. It's also pretty hard to sing and use a talkbox at the same time. So maybe that's purely theoretical, but you could blend your regular voice with your talkbox. It's probably not very practical, but just so you know, you can have complete control over it, and you don't even need to adjust much on your regular vocal track. So it's, in the most ideal way, this is your from a mixing desk point of view, this is the way to go. You have your top line for your vocals. That's probably like XLR on the right output for your XLRs, going straight to the mixing desk, and has no effects on it. Should put this on 0 dB going off or added to it. So your mixing desk engineer cannot say you are altering the sound of your vocals. It's just going straight to the Helix without any processing. And then the other track, you can, I don't know, assign this to a jack output, like for instance. Go to the iBox, maybe put some other effects on it, I don't know, whatever. You can even use a send block and send it back to your guitar track, whatever. So that's I think the most interesting way to integrate a talkbox effect. Let's go on to the vocoder effect. Okay, let's talk about integrating the vocoder into our chain. It's maybe the first thing that comes to mind is to put the vocoder at the start of the chain, but that's not really a good idea. If you do that, well, it's of course easy to set up, but it's not a good idea because, again, just like with the talkbox at the start of the video, you need to press two buttons, the vocoder itself plus some other effects on the Helix. Probably deactivate some effects in amp simulation, like for instance. We'll need to deactivate that to get a true vocoder sound. And after you're done vocodering, you have to put the one back on, and the vocoder, you have to switch that off. So that's not very easy, that's step dancing, and you want to avoid that. Then if you put it on the same chain as your guitar effects, you can try to do it that way, but it's really not a good idea. A vocoder is usually a very clean effect. It's pretty good as it comes out of the vocoder, and you don't really need to push it through a high gain amp. Maybe for some rather strange effect, maybe, but usually that's not the case. And what would you do with your regular vocals? If you're a singer, you need your microphone to do the regular task of singing. You can, of course, put two microphones in front of your face, but that's a bit stupid. If you have another approach to connecting the vocoder to the Helix, you will see that you can do just fine. First, we're going to tackle the first problem, the tapping, the foot tapping. Will make that a bit easier, and it's basically the same route as as what we did with the talkbox. You see the connection that I just explained in a schedule. You see the blue cord, that's my guitar, going into the vocoder, and the white cord is coming out of the vocoder, that's going into the Helix. So that's not really the best solution. What we're going to do is put the Helix in an effects loop. So I think I took send to and return to here, and we go with the guitar straight into the Helix. So that's very similar to what we did with the talkbox. We just use a send, then now we use the send and return. And that's a lot more controllable. You can deactivate effects and activate the effects loop at the same time with just one button, whether it's a snapshot or just some stomps, boxes or blocks that activate together on one switch. Doesn't matter, it's just one switch and you change the effect, and that's all you need. Now notice that there's still no regular voice possible, but we're going to fix that now in a third setup, a better setup. There's two variations in this presentation. I'll try to take I think the slightly better one, but you have to use a splitter cable. So that's just an XLR cable that goes from, I think it's one female to two males. Check it. Just you go from your microphone, it splits, one end goes into your vocoder, the other goes into the Helix. Very easy, costs almost nothing, just a few dollars maybe. And that's basically everything you need. You can still do the trick with the, well, trick. That's a big word for it, but you can still use the effects chain to control the vocoder, and you have now an extra track in the Helix, and I'll demonstrate that in this example. You can use the extra track on the Helix, track 2, to put your microphone there. You don't have to put any effects on it, but you can use then the one of the XLR outputs to send it back to the PA desk. When you're using the vocoder, you can, maybe by snapshots, when you activate it, you can mute this by having the snapshot mute the output on the regular microphone. So, and when you're done vocodering, you have the microphone signal just pass straight to your Helix with no added effects. So at the mixing desk, they should not be complaining about that. With the extra input of the microphone into your chain, you can take on a lot of routes how to send your signal. You can split up your amplifier from your vocoder sound. You can split up your regular singing, and you can add all kinds of outputs to them. And I'll demonstrate that in a later version of this setup, where we actually incorporate the talkbox also in the same effect. First, I'm going to demonstrate a small variation on this setup. That's this one. If you don't have the splitter cable, that's not really a problem. Then you go with your microphone straight into the Helix, like this, and then you use a send block to and an adapter cable. You need that then. You use a send block to send your microphone signal to your vocoder. So you probably need an adapter to go from jack to XLR. But yeah, you have to buy either one of them. The slight disadvantage of this setup is that you're using the extra send block. So if you were planning on using that extra send for something else like an effects chain or an amp loop or something, well, that's a pity. You have just lost the send block. So I prefer better setup 1 to this one. But for the rest, it's all the same. You can follow the schedule there. It looks like this in the HX edit, so you just use a send block. I use send 4 here. I don't have an adapter like that, so I can show you on the picture, but let's move on to the patch that I put on custom tone, where we incorporate everything. So talkbox, vocoder, regular guitar and regular singing, all in one patch, all switchable and all blendable just like you wanted, and controlled by snapshots. I think snapshots are the most ideal solution for this. This is how it looks like in real life. Don't mind the yellow cable, that's something I forgot to take out, but we don't need that. So it's just the green and the red are the effects loop for the vocoder. The white one is the send going to the talkbox. The black one coming in the Helix is my microphone, and you should see that it's split somewhere at the bottom of the picture, and the black one also goes to the vocoder, and the blue one is still my guitar cord going in the Helix. So it's a relatively simple setup. If you look at the effects, it looks complicated, but basically all the effects at the right side of the screen, this block of 4x4s, these 4x4 blocks, they are actually not necessary. They are, well, they are actually the effects that you use to produce your own tone. They are not necessary to work with this patch. You see two inputs. I have my guitar input and my microphone input. And the guitar input has as the first set of blocks an effect that you can use to send to to the talkbox, the pre-talkbox effects if you wish. If you want that, you don't really need that, but might be cool. Then the send block going to the talkbox. Then a split that is just a Y split and just centered and no balancing going on there. And then the effects loop going to the vocoder. And basically that's everything that is needed to make this patch work. At the right side you see 4 outputs. You can completely change these, they are now multi-output, but if you want to use only XLR or only jacks, whatever, you can change them, you can change the panning. But the crucial thing about these outputs is that these are controlled by snapshots. You see the values here between brackets. Depending on the snapshot that we choose, we mute one or more of these signals. Or not just mute, we can also dial them a bit down, we can blend with the other tracks. And the essential thing about this patch is that these 4 outputs are the 4 independent signals that we can control. We can have control over our guitar sound, our vocal sound, the vocoder sound and the talkbox sound, all independent from each other, and we can blend them or mute them just how we want them and just save everything in, what is it, 8 or 10 snapshots. 8 snapshots. The splits are, like I said before, all just centered. There's no need to control these switchings by snapshot because you just mute the end signal if you want to. And that's basically it. I have a Barebone version of this. You actually need a block on every path here just to prevent the path from collapsing on itself. Like the third path here, the path 2A, that's our regular voice. If we don't want an effect on that, which is pretty normal, I think, and let's have the mixing desk handle our effects on our regular voice. The problem is if we delete this reverb here, it actually does nothing. No problem then. But if we delete the reverb on a sub path, the path will collapse. And then you lost everything. So that's what you don't want. So actually you need to keep a block always on this path and a block always on this path to prevent the path from collapsing on the previous one. That's the basic version of it. You can move this around, of course. If you want more effects to go to the talkbox, you can just move that and it wouldn't change anything. Of course, you notice that you have for your guitar sound only one path here. I still have placed for I think 8 blocks, 8 blocks including the reverb here. That should be enough in my humble opinion, but of course you never know. I would recommend to use this path, this patch only for actual vocoder and talkbox songs, and if you want a really an extensive patch with, I don't know, 24 blocks to make your ideal guitar sound, use that one on every other song, but use this compact one for your vocoder and talkbox songs. That's basically it, I think. So I'll give you the overview right here. So this is the all-in-one patch using in this setup the Y cable. That's the only thing I got. So you see the vocoder connected in a loop, the talkbox just by a send, and then 4 separate signals going to the PA system or whatever you want. You can always blend them together, of course, in one output. The advantages are pretty simple. This is a short overview of how it's built, the effects. You can, of course, you're not limited to 4 positions on these rows, but you have to keep these blocks 2A, 2B and 2C and 3 you have to keep that in place in order for it to work. Alright, so that's the patch. This one is on custom tone together with the Barebone one. Thank you for watching. I hope this works for you, and I hope to have inspired you to go crazy with both Talkbox and Vocoder, of course, but also with some of the routing capabilities of the Helix. But I think this is a prime example of how great the Helix can be to process complicated stuff in a rather simple way. If you use this, you just have to change snapshots, and everything is set up. At the start of the show, activate your voice, your vocoder and your talkbox. Just leave them on all the show too, and at the right moment press one button and you're going. So I'll demonstrate this going from regular guitar and talking, not singing, to vocoder and whatever you have.